Hey, drop that. Seriously, you have no idea where it's been. Terran struggled to keep his voice low, but panic surged up his throat. He just finished wiping the grime from his face after prying open a jammed hatch inside this claustrophobic derelict station. He hadn't counted on being watched by someone, or something, that wanted to investigate his dirty, sweaty towel. Not just investigate. The lithe, scaled woman pressed it against her nose slits, inhaled deeply, then made a strange purring sound that prickled the back of his neck. Through the gloom of the flickering emergency lights, he saw how her teal skin shimmered with pulses of faint bioluminescence. It wasn't like a human flush, no pinkness or blushing, but the ripple of color across her scales made him think she was embarrassed or aroused? He wasn't sure. She clearly wasn't a standard occupant of this station. Her entire posture was tense, like a creature poised to run or defend. Terran lifted his palms in a gesture he hoped signaled peace. It's just, look, it's filthy. You don't want it. She responded in a language he didn't understand, a sudden hiss and click in her throat, but he caught a warm, smoky undertone that sent a shiver down his spine. She was unarmed, or at least he saw no blade. He saw no belt, no holster, only a thin, skin-hugging set of overlapping metallic plates that half resembled armor, half ceremonial attire. Her eyes glowed a soft green, ringed by swirling patterns of deeper emerald. A faint set of frilled fins behind her ears quivered as she lifted the towel to her face again, inhaling as though memorizing his scent. He was struck by how close the station corridors forced them to stand. He was a pilot on a salvage run. This was supposed to be a quick scavenge of a defunct outpost to see if any essential engine parts or salvageable tech remained. Instead, he'd stumbled upon something far more alive and complicated. Okay, so you're not going to let go, I see that. He tried again, voice dropping to a careful whisper as a pipe above them groaned dangerously. The station's structure was well on its way to collapse, with the entire place reeking of stale air, rusting metal, and creeping mold. Look, maybe we can do intros later. We should get out before this corridor vents and we both end up as cosmic dust. She either didn't understand his words or refused to be bossed around. Her gaze narrowed, and Terran could practically feel the annoyance rolling off her. Then she nodded, her chin dipping in a single sharp motion. He took a cautious step back, in part to see if she'd follow, in part to get away from her intense stare. She did follow, swirling lights dancing across her scales in patterns that gave him the sense of shifting moods. He caught the faint scent of her, something reminiscent of salt water and exotic flowers, like a hidden ocean grove in some far-flung world. It rattled him in an uncomfortably intimate way. They were forced to brush shoulders as they stepped through the cramped hatch. A static shock jumped between them at the contact, making him hiss softly under his breath. She jerked back, then gave a low growl of alarm, as though surprised by it as well. Guess static's universal. He mumbled and motioned for her to hurry. His cargo skiff was docked about 3 compartments down the corridor, near a hatch he'd forced open earlier. He was supposed to be alone here. He'd picked up a faint life reading on his handheld scanner, but it was too weak and sporadic for him to trust it was anything other than broken machinery. Now, seeing this scaled woman with shining eyes and delicate fins behind her ears, he realized the reading must have been from her. Where had she come from, and how had she ended up in this station? Terran kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting her to vanish. Instead, she clung to that disgusting towel as if it were a prized possession. He felt a weird twinge of embarrassment. It was damp with his sweat, probably smelled of fear and the stale air of the station. But she seemed to like it. The subtle way she cradled it told him she was getting a certain comfort out of his scent. That was the strangest thing. He wanted to ask her, but obviously the language barrier was going to be a real problem. Still, maybe gestures and expressions could get them through, at least until they were safe. They reached the hatch leading to his craft, which was no more than a battered, second-hand salvage skiff with barely enough space for him and some cargo crates. As he guided her inside, he realized with a jolt that if she insisted on coming along, and if he let her, he would have to rearrange half the junk inside to make space for her to sit. The moment they stepped into the skiff's cargo hold, the overhead lights flickered on, and he got a better look at her. She was tall, though her posture was slightly crouched, as though she was ready to bound away if threatened. Her skin was a mesmerizing interplay of aquamarine and turquoise scale plates, each reflecting the faint glow from some internal source. Now that they stood in better light, he noticed how her face had a gentle, almost delicate shape. A small nose ridge, large glowing eyes, elongated pupils. She had lips, narrower than a human's but still expressive. And she was regarding him as if trying to map his face for sincerity or threat. He carefully stepped toward the cockpit, and she kept pace. "I know you don't understand me," he murmured, "but we can't stay here. This whole place is one good solar flare away from imploding. Let me get this rig out of here." She watched him as he strapped himself into the pilot's seat. Then she startled at the hum of the engine starting up, letting out a hiss at the whirring noise. Terran reached back to calm her with an open palm. "We'll be fine," he said softly. "Just sit somewhere, okay?" She tilted her head. She'd managed to set the towel on her lap, her sharp fingertips idly toying with the threadbare edges. She still inhaled its scent sometimes, her eyes fluttering closed as though it was the only thing grounding her. He launched the skiff. The docking clamps released with a jolt, and the station's battered corridor fell away behind them. Terran glimpsed its skeletal superstructure drifting amid the darkness of space. The planet below was a swirling oceanic world with patches of land that looked clawed by storms. This star system was mostly uncharted, which was why Terran had come for salvage, fewer competitors. He made a mental note. If this alien woman needed returning to some place, maybe she was from that planet below, or maybe from some other system entirely. He'd never seen her species before, and he'd spent time in dozens of starports with travelers from across the sector. As soon as they were clear, Terran turned in his seat, noticing that she was gingerly exploring the cargo bay's walls and crates, tapping them with curious intensity. She paused every so often to sniff the air, like she was trying to figure out if something was edible or dangerous. When her attention shifted back to him, she advanced, tail swishing behind her in a slow, methodical rhythm. Tail. He hadn't noticed it before in the cramped corridor, but she did indeed have a slender, tapered tail that coiled in the air. It was ringed with small, flexible plates that seemed to flare whenever she was startled. "Hey," he said softly, though the cockpit was a tight space and there was nowhere to go if she decided to pounce on him. He could see she was driven by strong curiosity. She pressed her palm against his chest. Her fingertips grazed the front of his flight suit, finding the place where his heart hammered beneath. She let out a low, almost melodic hum, like she was matching her own pulse to his. Terran found himself swallowing. That close, he could see the faint lines in her pupils shift. She parted her lips to speak, but only soft clicking came out. "I'm Terran," he offered, pressing a hand to his own chest as if that might convey his name. Then he gently touched her forearm. Her scales were unexpectedly smooth and warm, not cool as he would have guessed. "Terran," he repeated. She blinked once, then attempted to mimic the word. "Ta-ran." Her voice was throaty, deeper than a human woman's but with a resonant note that tickled the inside of Terran's ears. Then she pressed her hand to her own chest. She spoke a name that had a rolling wave sound, something like Ashy, but layered with subtle vibrations in the back of her throat. Terran tried to echo it. "Ashy?" She let out what he guessed was an amused hiss and nodded. The corners of her lips curved. He smiled back, relieved. They had names. That was something. Then the rotted towel slipped from her lap, and she snatched it before it hit the floor, pressing it back to her face with fervor. Terran watched her eyes drift shut as she inhaled him from that fabric, and he felt a flush creeping along his neck. There was something about seeing her so enthralled by his scent that felt undeniably intimate, even invasive. Like she'd taken a piece of him without permission. But if he was honest with himself, a part of him felt strangely wanted. Being out here alone in the galaxy was a lonely business. He had a handful of scrapes with local slavers or corporate security forces, always outrunning them for whatever salvage he could. Interactions with others were fleeting, a quick sail at an outpost, a short negotiation for fuel, then back to his solitary runs. Now, all at once, this scaled alien woman was pressed into his personal space, letting out these soft moans of contentment as she wrapped herself in his scent. He had no clue where it would lead, but the electric energy between them made his heart pound harder than the thruster's hum. He turned back to the console and punched in a course. There was a small orbiting trade station a few parsecs away where he could at least attempt to find a translator matrix, or some universal biotech that might help them communicate. But first, they needed to get out of the gravity well of the planet below. The skiff's engines whined in protest as he pushed them to full burn. Ashy stumbled slightly, unbalanced, but Terran reached out to steady her. She braced herself by grabbing his shoulder, her scales buzzing with that faint light. Their eyes met. She didn't let go right away, and Terran felt a pulse of heat surge through him. Maybe it was the adrenaline of the escape, maybe it was the unbelievably close proximity, but the moment felt charged. He cleared his throat. "We're okay," he whispered, unsure whether he was reassuring her or himself. They broke free of the planet's pull, the skiff rocking as it accelerated into the emptiness of open space. Terran engaged the autopilot for a moment, turning in his chair to face Ashy. She was still gripping that worn towel with the same intensity as he gripped the pilot's controls. "That's, not the most comfortable bedding," he remarked gently, pantomiming a pillow to see if she understood. She watched his face, then looked down at the towel, as if not understanding why he might find it odd that she was clutching it so reverently. She nuzzled it one more time, the hum in her throat turning almost plaintive. Then she tugged gently at his flight suit sleeve, pulling him closer to her. Terran let out a slightly anxious laugh. Her eyes bored into his, bright with a swirling mix of luminescent color. Whatever cultural taboo or custom was in play, she made it clear that rag of his, sweaty and dirty, was precious to her. And the way her gaze drifted from the cloth to his body told him he was the real reason she found it so compelling. He felt a twist of embarrassment, but also a wave of unexpected desire that flushed through his veins. He hadn't realized just how starved he was for actual touch, for closeness. He forced himself to break eye contact and turned to check the scanning console. A faint beep indicated no immediate threats. With a short sigh, he swiveled back to face her again. "So, what am I supposed to do with you?" The question hung between them, rhetorical but heavy. She let out a soft series of clicks, as if speaking to him in her unknown tongue, then she gently lifted his hand and pressed it to her cheek. Beneath his fingertips, he felt the faint ridges of her scales, the warmth of her skin. She closed her eyes, a sigh escaping her lips. Terran was astounded by just how vulnerable the moment felt. This station's salvage run was the last place he'd expected to find someone who needed him. For just an instant, the tension of the endless scavenging lifestyle fell away. He found himself wanting to protect her. His mind raced with questions. Was she an escaped captive from somewhere? A lost scout from a different star system? Was there someone searching for her even now? And how was he going to navigate this sudden bond she seemed to form with him and his scent? The hum of the engines became a background lullaby, weaving around them. As she pressed closer, Terran had an urge to hold her, to reassure her with a gesture that might bridge the gap between their languages. But everything felt so new and precarious that he simply let his hand rest on her cheek. A moment stretched. Then she exhaled, her scales shifting color in an iridescent shimmer. The wave of color rippled across her arms, her neck, down to the base of her tail. It was mesmerizing and left him momentarily speechless. Finally, Terran cleared his throat. "Let's get out of here," he muttered, flicking a few switches. The skiff jumped into faster-than-light travel with a lurch, spitting them into a swirling corridor of brilliant lights outside the windows. He set the autopilot coordinates for the nearest hub, a bare-bones trade station called Galvvic Spire, known for dealing in contraband. Terran had a few friendly connections there, or at least not openly hostile ones. They might help him identify his mysterious passenger. Then maybe he could figure out if she had a home to return to. But a pang in his chest suggested that the idea of handing her over to anyone didn't sit well with him. For all he knew, that place could be crawling with black market slavers who'd be far too interested in a new alien species. He found himself watching Ashy, noticing how she curled up against the cabin wall, hugging the towel to her chest. She was making these soft humming noises again, a kind of lullaby to herself. Despite the bizarre circumstances, Terran felt an unexpected warmth bloom inside him. He thought about how quiet it had been in his skiff for so long, how lonely. Now there was another presence, someone who didn't just stand apart from him but sought him out. He wasn't sure how long the jump would take. A few hours, possibly, depending on the corridor stability. His eyes drifted back to Ashy, who was tracing the edges of the towel and occasionally breathing his scent. He rose carefully from the pilot's seat and moved closer, lowering his voice. "You can rest," he said, demonstrating by leaning his head on his hand. She nodded in understanding, pointing to the small cot that folded out from the wall behind them. "That's for sleeping. Here." He pressed the button, letting the cot extend. She watched with rapt attention, then slithered over, scaling plates rustling. She patted the thin mattress, testing it. Then she gazed at him again, gesturing to the small space next to her. Did she want him to lie down too? That notion made his pulse jump. It had been a painfully long time since Terran had shared any real closeness with someone. The idea of lying next to this mesmerizing alien woman, feeling the warmth of her presence, was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. He decided it was probably best to give her space. He gestured to himself, then to the cockpit seat, pantomiming that he would stay to pilot. She frowned, an expression that, on her scaled features, was more subtle but still readable. Then she nodded, exhaling a long breath that made her frills droop slightly. She carefully lay on the cot, pulling the towel across her torso like a cherished blanket. Terran swallowed. He was thankful the cockpit lights were dim, or she might have seen how flustered he was. He turned to face the controls. The swirl of lights from the jump corridor filled the viewport. He tried to focus on that, but his mind kept wandering back to the feel of her scales under his fingers, her luminous gaze, the soft moan she made when she pressed his towel close. He flicked on the autopilot's alarm system to alert him if anything went wrong. The quiet hum of the engines, the swirl of starry color outside, all lulled him into a reflective haze. Eventually, exhaustion tugged at his eyelids. He risked a look over his shoulder and found Ashy's eyes half open, watching him. The towel was partially bunched under her cheek, and she looked so eerily content in that moment. The corners of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile but something akin to acceptance or trust. He gave her a small nod, letting his own eyes close for a moment. Hours passed without Terran realizing it. When the autopilot beeped, he jerked awake, startled to find he was half out of his seat and Ashy was crouched near him, her face inches from his. She must have come to check on him while he dozed off. He rubbed his eyes, heart lurching at the closeness. Hi," he murmured. Her eyes flicked to the control panel, and she hissed softly, motioning with her hand. They were nearing the end of the jump corridor, approaching the coordinates for Galvvic's Spire. He swallowed the dryness in his throat, then sat up properly, adjusting the flight controls. "Right. We're almost there. Let's see how well this station's going to receive us." He guided the skiff out of FTL, and soon the hulk of the trade station came into view. It was an ugly shape, all spines and blocky modules stitched together, drifting near a dusty ring of asteroids. The docking beacons glowed green, meaning at least they were open to visitors. Terran sighed in relief. "Okay, guess we better see if there's a translator or something," he muttered. He glanced at Ashy, who was pressing a palm to the viewport, staring in wonder at the junky station. He smiled at her reaction. "It's not pretty, but it might help us figure this out, right?" She turned and gave him a half-lidded look, like she was simply content to be near him, wherever that might be. Terran busied himself sending docking codes. The approach went smoothly enough. As the skiff was guided into a small bay on the station, Terran had a pang of nerves. He had no idea how the local toughs or black market dealers would react to a new, exotic alien. She had no identification, no official record that he knew of. Still, Maybe he could keep her hidden or pass her off as part of some deal. The thought made him queasy. He didn't want to treat her like cargo. That look on her face, the way she clutched his old towel like a prized memento, he felt he owed her more dignity than that. But he also knew if the station's enforcers got suspicious, they might try to claim her as contraband or property. Taryn was no hero, but the idea of letting that happen stirred a protective fury in him. He glanced at Ashy. "Stay close, yeah?" he said softly. She nodded, stepping toward him with an air of resolute determination. The skiff settled with a clank onto the docking clamps. Air pressure equalized with a hiss. Taryn pulled on a jacket, trying to hide the grime of his flight suit. He motioned Ashy to do the same, but she just looked at him curiously, then patted her scaled chest plates, as if to say she already had armor. Taryn shook his head, chuckling. "Fine, but keep your hood up. Maybe cover your face." He rummaged in a crate, producing a spare cloak he'd once used for a smuggling job. It smelled musty, but better than nothing. He gently placed it around Ashy's shoulders. She stiffened at first, then relaxed, peering up at him. Her eyes softened. "It'll help you blend in," he murmured. She gave a small nod, her tail flicking behind her. When the ramp lowered, the station's stale, metallic air rushed in. Taryn stepped out first, scanning the dock. A few shady characters lurked by crates of stolen goods or black market contraband, but no one immediately challenged him. Good. He reached back, and Ashy slipped her hand into his, a gesture of trust that sent heat through his chest. He squeezed gently, then strode forward, trying to look like he belonged here. The overhead lights flickered, and the clang of machinery echoed down the corridor. The place reeked of chemicals and old cooking grease. They made their way toward a battered sign that read, "Welcome, travelers," though half the letters had burned out. Eventually, Taryn found the kiosk of a half-cyborg vendor who specialized in language modules. The man had a mechanical eye that buzzed as it focused on Taryn, ignoring Ashy entirely for the moment. "What's your poison, friend?" he croaked, leaning forward on his metal elbows. "I've got translator implants, portable voice boxes, Neuralink patches, whatever your credit stash can handle." Taryn inhaled, glancing at Ashy. She looked around warily, clutching the cloak around her. "I need a translator that can handle an unknown dialect," Taryn said carefully. "It's never been logged. Possibly brand new species." The vendor let out a slow whistle, one of his metal hands adjusting a dial on his temple. "Rare. Gonna cost you. I got an advanced AI set that can do a wide frequency analysis. But it's not cheap." Taryn grimaced. "How much?" The price the vendor quoted made Taryn's stomach lurch. He didn't have that many credits, not anymore. "Could we work out a trade? I have some salvage." Ashy stepped forward then, letting the hood slip slightly so the vendor could see her scaled cheek and the faint glow of her eyes. She hissed a single word at him. The vendor's mechanical eye widened. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "She's the real deal, isn't she? Not some cheap mod job. And that language, never heard anything like it." Taryn tensed. The vendor might suddenly decide Ashy herself was valuable. But the man turned back to rummage in a crate behind him. "All right, let me see what I can rig up. I can do a partial swap for some salvage. I also want a favor." Taryn raised a brow. "What favor?" The vendor smirked. "Sometimes I need a pilot who doesn't mind skipping customs. You do a run for me next time you're around, I'll knock off half the cost." Taryn exhaled, but nodded. "Fine." The vendor set out a small device that looked like a sleek earpiece. "Clip it behind your ear. It'll pick up her vocalizations, run them through a broad phonetic filter, and attempt to generate a synthetic voice in real time. But she might need one too if you want her to understand you." Taryn glanced at Ashy, uncertain how she'd react to having some weird piece of hardware attached to her. He gently placed the earpiece behind his own ear first, turning it on. A faint hum vibrated. Then he took a second earpiece, stepping toward Ashy. She looked at him, then at the device, curiosity etched across her face. Gently, he brushed her frilled ear fin aside and clipped it behind her ear. She flinched slightly, then paused, letting out a confused trill of sound. An instant later, Taryn heard a mechanical, halting approximation of speech in his ear. "What is happening?" He jerked back, mouth hanging open. She'd spoken in her language, but the device had interpreted it. Ashy blinked rapidly, startled by the sudden voice in her ear. "You can hear me?" Taryn forced down a surge of excitement. "Yes," he said quietly. "I can hear you. I understand you." "Ashy?" She inhaled sharply as the device spat out a translation of his words. Her eyes went wide, and she reached out, pressing a trembling hand to his chest. "You know my name," she said, the translator's tinny monotone doing little to hide the raw emotion in her voice. Terrence swallowed, his pulse hammering. "That's your name, right? Ashy?" She nodded, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. He realized then that her scales near her cheeks flushed a deeper turquoise. I have been alone. I could not speak, could not share my words," she breathed. Her speech was broken by the device's staccato patterns, but Taryn felt the weight of her relief and sorrow. She bowed her head. "You are the first one who tried to listen." Taryn's throat felt tight. He glanced around, conscious of the vendor's watchful gaze. "Let's get out of here," he murmured. "We can talk on my skiff." "Safely." She nodded in agreement, a shaky exhale leaving her lips. The vendor snatched up Taryn's salvage payment, clearly intrigued by the novelty of Ashy but not pressing any further. Taryn led Ashy back through the corridor. She clung to him, trembling slightly under the cloak as curious stares followed them. Taryn hastened his pace, wanting to put as many sealed doors between her and the station's opportunistic inhabitants as possible. Her hand was warm in his, and each time she stumbled or shifted, he felt a brush of the cloak revealing her iridescent skin. She was trying to hide her features, but it was obvious she was not from around here. Once they reached the skiff, Taryn immediately sealed the hatch behind them. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Ashy pulled back the hood, blinking under the overhead lights. She looked at him, her lips parted. "You... Taryn, yes?" He nodded, stepping close. "That's me." She gave a slow blink that the translator struggled to parse. "Taryn, I owe you life? Freed me from the dying station." He frowned. "How did you end up there?" She closed her eyes, letting out a shaky sigh. "I was prisoner. Slavers, they took me from my nest. I escaped. Found that station. Hoped to hide. But everything was broken. I starved, grew weak. Then you?" She held up the towel in her hands. "Scent of you gave me hope." Taryn let that sink in. She'd been running from slavers. That might mean they were still after her. And that old, rotting outpost had been her hiding place. She must have been desperate, living off scraps, terrified. His chest tightened. He gently brushed a hand across her shoulder. "Hey, you're safe here. I'm not going to let them take you again." She shuddered at his touch, pressing the towel close to her face for a moment, inhaling. Then her translator crackled as she tried to find the right words. "Your smell was comfort. We have strong bond to scent. I recognized kindness. I felt drawn." Her luminous gaze darted away, as if embarrassed. "I keep your cloth near. Your essence keeps me calm." Heat prickled at Taryn's neck. He remembered how she moaned his name as she clung to that towel. The memory of her inhaling it was burned into his mind. He managed a small nod. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I don't mind. It just surprised me." She let out a faint, throaty chuckle. "Our species exchange scents, very important in trust. Perhaps you do not do that?" He shook his head sheepishly. "Not usually. But I'm starting to see the appeal." He tried a grin. She lifted her free hand, tracing a scale on her jaw that seemed to have been chipped or scarred. If you allow, I wish stay with you." I have no home. My nest is destroyed. The raw vulnerability in her eyes tore at him. He took a measured breath, steeling himself against the swirl of emotions. Of course. I'm not going to abandon you. But we need to be careful. The galaxy can be cruel. We'll find a safe place. Maybe figure out more about your people. She gave a slow, solemn nod. Then she gently touched his chest again, near his heart. You let me stay near you? She paused, swallowing. Your presence, it soothes me. Terran's breath caught, but he nodded. Yeah, he said softly. You can stay as close as you want. Time blurred after that. Terran set the skiff's course away from the station, not wanting to linger where any slaver might catch wind of the unusual alien in his hold. He didn't have a set destination, just away, deeper into the fringes. Ashe hovered near him in the cockpit, occasionally testing out her new ability to speak. The translator was far from perfect. It often garbled her words, and occasionally she'd utter a phrase that made no sense to him. But they managed to stumble through, building a vocabulary of sorts for each other. She taught him a few of her own words, the tonal shifts in her voice mesmerizing him. He offered some basic human phrases, which she repeated with a determined, slightly husky accent. Every time she said his name, it made his chest flutter. Their interactions were peppered with awkward, intensely intimate moments. At one point, Terran opened a ration pack for them to share. He took a bite, then handed a piece to her. She sniffed it suspiciously, then took a tiny nibble. While it was obviously not to her taste, she forced a grateful smile and swallowed. Then she tilted her head, leaning in, and parted her lips, as if offering him a taste of something from her mouth. He froze, realizing this might be how her species shared nourishment. Unsure, he parted his lips slightly, letting her gently brush the morsel across his tongue. The closeness was jarring. He tasted a mix of the ration's blandness, plus a faint, mysterious tang from her mouth. She studied his face intently for any sign of revulsion. Terran forced himself to remain calm, even though his nerves sizzled from the contact. Her eyes widened, a soft purr escaping her throat, as if appreciative that he accepted her gesture. Later, she rummaged through the small storage compartments, discovering Terran's few personal possessions. Chief among them was a battered jacket from his home planet. She pressed it to her face, inhaling deeply the remnants of his scent. Terran, half laughing, tried to take it back, but she clutched it and gave him a pleading look. He raised his hands in surrender. All right. You can hold it. She nestled it around her shoulders, hugging the old cloth like a child might cling to a blanket. The translator crackled as she spoke. It smells of you. It comforts me. He rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah. Sure. Just go for it. Every hour, they seemed to grow more comfortable with each other's presence, bridging that gap of fear and uncertainty. Terran found himself meeting her gaze more often, noticing the micro-expressions on her scaled face, the way her fins twitched when she was curious or anxious. She, in turn, seemed fascinated by his every little quirk, from the way he tapped his foot when he was thinking to the shape of his mouth when he spoke. Sometimes she would lightly run her fingertip along his jaw or the back of his neck, a question in her eyes, as if memorizing his texture the way she memorized his scent. He'd hold her hand in return, curling his fingers around hers. Each small contact felt charged with an electricity he hadn't experienced in years. But overshadowing these intimate discoveries was the knowledge that slavers might still be out there, hunting for Ashe or others of her kind. Terran set a course that hopped from one empty sector to another, avoiding major trade routes. He aimed to stay off the grid until he could come up with a plan. The tension grew in him, a quiet dread that someone might track them. That dread mingled with the blossoming closeness he felt whenever Ashe's luminous eyes locked with his. One evening, or what passed for evening in the endless expanse of space, Terran was lying in the cot while Ashe occupied the pilot's seat, fiddling with the translator's settings to refine the voice. He dozed, half listening to the beep of the NAV console. Then he felt movement. Ashe slipped onto the narrow cot beside him. The translators mechanical were spitting out a few broken words. Cannot sleep alone. Warmth needed. He blinked, heart pounding. The cot was cramped for one, let alone two. Her body pressed along his, her scales warm and firm. He hesitated, scanning her eyes for any sign of discomfort or fear. Instead, she wrapped the old towel around them both, effectively cocooning him in the sweaty cloth from the station. He gave a strangled laugh. That thing is absolutely rancid by now, he joked. She tilted her head, her lips curving in confusion. Then the translator sputtered. I like your rancid. Taryn choked on another laugh. I'll take that as a compliment. She hesitantly placed a hand on his chest again, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. He felt her tail curl around his calf. Warmth bloomed between them in that tight space, and Taryn realized how easy it would be to let the moment slip into something deeper. He reached up, brushing a thumb over her cheek. She let out a soft, trembling exhale. The translator stuttered. If you do not want me near, tell me. Taryn's voice came out hushed. No, it's not that. It's just new. I don't want to rush you or... She shook her head, a subtle glow rippling across her scales. Your closeness helps me heal. I feel protected. You feel needed? Her words poured out in halts and starts, but Taryn understood the gist. He nodded, swallowing. Yeah. I do. She lowered her face until their foreheads touched, her eyes sliding closed. Taryn shut his eyes too, letting the gentle contact speak for them both. For a while, either moved, content in each other's breathing. The station fiasco, the potential threat of slavers, the uncertain future, it all melted away, replaced by the hush of the skiff's engines and the rhythmic thump of two hearts finding common ground. Eventually, they drifted to sleep like that, wrapped in each other's warmth. Taryn awoke later to find her still curled against him. Her scaled arm was draped over his torso, her face nuzzled into his neck. The translator device's indicator lights blinked softly, turned off in sleep mode. He gently extricated himself, trying not to wake her. She stirred, whimpering at the loss of contact, fingers tightening in his jacket. Ship, he soothed, brushing her frilled ear fin gently. I'm just going to check our course. She blinked at him, drowsy, then let him go. He pressed a tender kiss to the top of her head, surprising himself with the gesture but not regretting it. She sighed contentedly, returning to her light doze. He stepped into the cockpit, scanning the instruments. All seemed quiet. No suspicious signals on the scope. But a part of him suspected that peace was only temporary. If slavers had her once, they might not simply let her go. They'd be searching every corner of the galaxy for an alien that got away. Taryn rubbed his temples, trying to quell the anxiety coiling in his gut. For the first time in years, it wasn't just about him surviving. Ashy's fate was intertwined with his now. A resolution took shape in his mind: if they came, he would defend her. She'd been alone, frightened, living off scraps in a crumbling station. No more. As long as she wanted his help, he would stand by her. After a while, the autopilot beeped that they were nearing a small system known for being deserted except for a few mining colonies. Taryn figured it might be a good place to lay low, maybe find a more discreet translator or even a xenobiologist who could help figure out more about Ashy's species. He returned to the cot and found her awake, propped on one elbow, the towel bunched at her side. She gave him a sleepy smile. Morning? Or your morning? The translator parsed the words slowly. He chuckled. Close enough. We'll be arriving in a quiet system soon. We can restock supplies. She nodded, then placed a gentle hand on his wrist. Thank you. Taryn, she said, her voice throaty even through the device. For not abandoning me. He met her gaze, heart clenching. Never. She sat up, the blanket slipping away from her scaled shoulders, revealing the graceful lines of her collarbones. A faint luminescent pattern traced across them, pulsing in time with her breath. He remembered how self-conscious he'd been about letting her hold his filthy towel, but now it felt oddly natural. She gave him a coy look. Her expression was new to him, but there was a playful tilt to her lips. Your smell. I have it, but. She trailed off, her cheeks flushing darker. May I have you? He blinked. Me? She fumbled for words, her translator stuttering. Contact. Closeness. I want to know your body's warmth. He wasn't sure how to respond at first. The air between them became almost electric. Then he closed the short distance, letting her hands slide up his arms. Their lips hovered a fraction apart, breath mingling. He paused, searching her eyes for any hesitation. But she softly closed that gap, pressing her mouth to his. Her lips were cooler than a human's, but the moment she tasted him, she let out a low hum that sent a rush of heat through his veins. Their kiss was tentative, both uncertain but eager. She parted from him slightly, looking shy yet exhilarated. Is that how you greet? She whispered. Taryn let out a shaky laugh. Sometimes it's just how we show affection. She attempted a grin. I like affection. They spent a few precious minutes exploring that gentle intimacy, her hands traveling the contours of his arms, shoulders, then tracing the shape of his jaw. He savored the sensation of her scaled lips, so unlike a human's but still unbelievably soft. For a moment, he forgot the rest of the galaxy and lost himself in the simple wonder of discovering someone new, someone who was equally enthralled by him. But the beep of the console reminded him they were about to drop out of FTL. With a reluctant sigh, Taryn drew back. We should handle the approach. She nodded, though her eyes glimmered with unspoken desire. As they arrived in the mining system, Taryn scanned for signs of trouble. He found none. They drifted near a moon that housed a small supply depot. He guided the skiff into a hidden orbit behind the moon's curve, hoping to avoid detection. They needed to plan. Taryn had a few contacts he might try to reach for discreet help. Meanwhile, Ashley was content to remain close, reading his expressions, occasionally stealing a small kiss that made the translator beep in confusion. He'd laugh every time, realizing the device was picking up noises that didn't fit neatly into language. At last, Taryn unbuckled his seat harness, turning to Ashley. I need to consider how we're going to keep you safe. If these slavers are after you, we can't just wander around any station. We might need to stay hidden. She swallowed, hugging the jacket. I hate to hide, but I cannot fight them alone. Her voice wavered. He gently took her hand. You don't have to. I'll fight with you. She gazed at him in open wonder. You do not owe me that. He squeezed her fingers. Doesn't matter. I'm doing it anyway. She exhaled softly, the tension in her posture easing. I am grateful. Your species must be kind, or maybe it's just you. Taryn wanted to tell her that not all humans were kind, that many were no better than her captors. But he left it unsaid for now, preferring to let her see the best side of him rather than explaining the worst of humanity. They bunkered down in the skiff for a few days, rationing supplies, resting, and refining the translator to better capture the nuances of her voice. Each day, they shared more of themselves through conversation. She explained that her species was called something that didn't translate directly, but loosely meant Fathakind, dwellers of deep aquatic realms on a distant planet. They communicated heavily through scent in the water, which was why she was drawn to Taryn's towel so intensely. In the absence of water mediums, they used their frills to pick up chemical traces. Taryn told her about his life as a freelance pilot, orphaned at a young age, drifting from job to job, never quite finding a place he fit in. As she listened, eyes shining, occasionally brushing her fingertips over his hair in a gesture of empathy. Their bond deepened with each shared moment. Sometimes they flirted clumsily, each referencing cultural concepts the other didn't quite grasp. She asked him once if humans nested in large groups to mate. He nearly choked on his drink before explaining that typically, humans had a wide variety of relationships, but usually, mating was more private. She was intrigued, peppering him with questions about rituals and how humans signaled attraction. He found himself blushing at the topic, especially when she explicitly asked how humans physically joined. He tried to explain it gently, not sure how close her anatomy was to his. Her eyes flashed with curiosity, and he realized that, for her, These topics weren't taboo but part of an important bond. At night, they continued to share that narrow cot, sometimes drifting to sleep in each other's arms, other times staying awake talking, pressing gentle kisses to each other's cheeks. The tension between them pulsed with a growing heat. Taryn found it harder to keep things innocent when her scaled thighs brushed against his under the blanket, or she pressed her cool lips to his neck, releasing that soft hum that made his mind hazy. He wondered if he was crossing a line or if she felt just as drawn to him. But from the way she whispered his name and curled her tail around his ankle, he sensed her desire matched his. One morning, Taryn was checking the short-range scanners when he got a ping. A small vessel had entered the moon's orbit, scanning actively. The vessel's signature was blocked, but from the patterns, Taryn suspected it was a slaver or mercenary craft. His heart pounded. "Ashy," he called, voice tight. She came to his side, eyes wide. "Someone looking for me?" she asked, voice trembling through the translator. Taryn forced himself to remain calm. "Maybe. We have to be ready to run." She swallowed hard, stepping closer until her shoulder pressed against his. "I do not want to cause you trouble." He placed a steadying hand on hers. "You're not causing trouble. We're in this together." She nodded, determination sparking in her glowing eyes. They powered up the skiff quietly, hoping to slip out of orbit without drawing attention. But the unknown vessel adjusted course immediately, locking them in. Taryn cursed under his breath. "They see us." He punched the thrusters, accelerating away from the moon's shadow. The black wedge of the other ship loomed closer, scanning beams raking across Taryn's hull. Then a crackle on the comm channel. "Unidentified skiff, prepared to be boarded. We have a warrant for contraband." Taryn shot Ashy a grim look. "It's definitely them." She shuddered, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "We fight?" He hesitated. The skiff wasn't built for combat, and their best chance was to outrun them. "We run first," he said, voice tense. She bobbed her head in agreement. The chase was harrowing. The slaver's ship was bigger, with more powerful engines, but Taryn's skiff was nimble. He executed a series of tight maneuvers, skimming dangerously close to the moon's surface, forcing the larger vessel to break pursuit momentarily. Ashy clung to the co-pilot seat, swallowing nervously every time they nearly clipped a ridge. Adrenaline surged in Taryn's veins as he pushed the skiff to its limits, dancing between crags and canyons. The slavers unleashed a pulse beam that sent a jolt of energy surging through the skiff's systems, nearly frying the controls. Taryn hissed, "Hang on!" He spun the skiff in a barrel roll, weaving behind a rocky outcrop. The momentary cover let them boost away at full throttle. For a heart-pounding minute, the scanners showed the other vessel lagging behind. Then the readout indicated they were back in pursuit. "Damn it!" Taryn snarled, pushing the engine readouts into the red zone. "We need a warp corridor, but these short-range FTL drives can't spool up instantly." Ashy tightened her grip on the seat. "I can assist." Her eyes glowed fiercely, but Taryn shook his head. "Not unless you know a way to." He was cut off as the slavers fired again, a searing bolt that sizzled across the starboard side. Warning alarms shrieked. The hull integrity was compromised. "We're not going to last long. We have to find a place to land or hide." He scoured the sensor readout. There was an asteroid belt not far from the moon's orbit. If they could weave inside, maybe they could lose the pursuers in the debris. He spun the skiff, ignoring the metallic groans of stressed plating, and hurtled toward the belt. "Hold on!" he yelled, plunging them into the swirling field of rocks. Some were the size of buildings, others mere pebbles. The slaver's ship followed, peppering them with small caliber shots that ricocheted off nearby asteroids. Taryn grit his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead, while Ashy gripped his arm and whispered prayers in her alien tongue. The translator struggled to keep up. "Protect us, guide us, that we may swim free from the jaws." Her voice cracked. Taryn's breath hitched as the skiff scraped an asteroid. Sparks flew. "We're losing structural integrity," he muttered, eyes darting across the console. "But the slaver's ship is bigger. They'll have a harder time maneuvering." Indeed, the scans showed the larger craft struggling to keep pace. It clipped an asteroid, sending shards of metal spinning. Terran seized the opportunity, accelerating deeper, weaving through a cluster of rotating boulders. Then, with one last desperate surge, he rocketed out of the belt, engaged the warp spool, and hammered the ignition. A swirl of starlight enveloped them. They shot into a short-range FTL jump, leaving the slavers behind in a swirl of chaotic debris. Relief and exhaustion crashed over Terran. He let go of the controls, breathing raggedly as the skiff stabilized into the jump corridor. Ashy sagged against the console, trembling. Terran reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. She turned to him, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "They will keep coming," she whispered through the translator. He swallowed hard, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "I know. We'll figure out a way to stop them from hunting you. I promise." She nodded, burying her face against his neck, inhaling him as if that alone could ground her. They stayed like that for a long time, hearts pounding from the near-death chase. Terran rubbed soothing circles on her back, letting the tension drain away. The translator hissed with a few glitchy attempts at processing her rapid, quiet words. "Thank you, Terran. I feel your heart. You are a safe place." Each phrase struck him harder than any bullet. He felt the fierce need to protect her, to shield her from the horrors that had shattered her life. He hadn't asked to be a savior, but she needed someone, and he couldn't turn away. After a time, he coaxed her to help him check the damage. The starboard hull was badly compromised, some systems offline. They'd have to land somewhere soon for repairs. The short-range jump wouldn't last forever. Once it ended, they'd emerge somewhere random in the deep black. Terran cursed under his breath, frustrated by the constant running. But as he glanced at Ashy, who diligently scanned the damage readouts even though the translator sputtered at the technical terminology, he felt a renewed determination. He'd never had someone rely on him like this. It was terrifying and strangely exhilarating. When the jump ended, they found themselves near an uncharted planet with swirling green storms in its atmosphere. Sensors indicated it might have a stable enough environment to land and attempt repairs. Terran approached cautiously, hoping no slaver presence lurked there. The readouts were minimal, showing just rugged terrain and volatile weather patterns. Still, it was their best bet. He guided the skiff down, battling turbulence as they breached the cloud layers. Lightning danced across the sky, and Terran's knuckles whitened on the controls. "This is going to be rough," he muttered. Ashy latched onto his arm, trusting him in that unspoken way that turned his fear into resolve. He found a somewhat stable patch of land, jagged rock spires rising out of swirling, phosphorescent mists. The landing was hard, jarring them both, but they touched down in one piece. The skiff's engines groaned, then quieted. For a moment, they sat there in the silence, the only sounds their ragged breathing. Terran shut his eyes. "We made it," Ashy exhaled shakily. "Yes," she whispered. "Because you are skilled." He chuckled wearily. "Or just lucky." She smiled softly, leaning in to brush her lips against his jaw. The translator warbled. "I trust your hands at the controls." Terran swallowed, letting the gentle affection wash over him. "Let's get outside, survey the terrain, and see if we can fix the damage." She nodded, a spark of determination lighting her gaze. They grabbed what gear they could, including Terran's battered toolkit, then ventured into the unknown. The planet's surface was a sight to behold. Pale green storms rippled overhead, flashing with strange silver lightning. The ground was covered in a kind of bioluminescent moss that glowed softly under their boots. A tangy scent filled the air, reminiscent of ozone and sea brine. Ashy breathed deeply, her frills extended. "Reminds me of my world's storms," she murmured. Terran forced a smile. "Is that good?" She shrugged. "Our storms also dangerous." They circled the skiff, examining the scorched hull. Terran muttered curses at the extent of the damage. "I can patch some holes, but the thruster assembly might need new parts. We'll have to make do with what we have." Ashy touched the twisted metal gingerly, her scales pulsing with sympathy. I owe this ship my life. I will help fix it. Taryn gave her a grateful look. We'll do it together. They worked in relative silence, with only the hiss of the translator occasionally translating Ashley's questions about which tool to use or how to seal a crack. She was surprisingly adept, picking up the mechanical basics quickly. Taryn found himself admiring her clever hands, the way her fins twitched as she concentrated. Eventually, sweat plastered Taryn's hair to his forehead, and Ashley's face glistened with a film of condensation. He called for a break, and they retreated under a small overhang by a spire of rock to shelter from the drizzling rain that had begun to fall. The rain droplets glowed faintly in the gloom, creating a surreal, shimmering curtain. Ashley drew close to him, pressing the towel, still unbelievably precious to her, against her face. Taryn found himself leaning back against the rock, feeling a strange sense of peace, despite everything. She looked up at him, her lips parted, her tail swaying gently. Your ship, we are healing it, she said softly, the translator crackling. I feel, we are doing that, with ourselves too. Taryn gave a small nod, heart clenching. Yeah. I guess we are. She moved closer, the gap between them shrinking until he felt her breath on his skin. The soft patter of the luminescent rain was the only sound, aside from the quiet whir of the translator device. He could sense the tension pulsing between them, that slow burn they'd been tending. He lifted a hand to cradle her jaw, thumb grazing her cheek scales. Her eyes fluttered shut, and she let out a trembling sigh. Taryn felt the warmth of her body as she pressed herself against him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Taryn, she breathed, voice quivering. I want you. The translator delivered the words in that artificial monotone, but he felt the raw passion behind them. He brushed a damp strand of hair from his forehead, his heart hammering so loudly he swore she could hear it. Ashy eye. He struggled to find words. This was far more than a casual desire. It was a culmination of trust, fear, longing, and the bond they'd formed in the face of danger. I want you too, he whispered. Her reaction was immediate. She pressed her mouth to his, letting out a low, throaty moan that vibrated against his lips. The translator garbled a confusion of syllables before giving up. Taryn's hands found her waist, pulling her flush against him. Her scales were slick from the rain, but her body was so warm, alive with that faint luminescent glow. He could feel her heart pounding. Their kisses deepened, breath hitching, each tasting the other's fear and hope. The alienness of her only heightened Taryn's senses, making every brush of their tongues, every nip of her scaled lips, a thrilling new discovery. She broke away briefly, panting, her gaze heavy-lidded. Do we have to hide? She asked, voice trembling. Taryn scanned the empty landscape, the swirling storm overhead. No. We're alone here. She nodded, pressing her forehead to his, letting the translator slip from her ears so it wouldn't interrupt them with static. Her fins flared, her tail curling around his leg possessively. Taryn's breath caught as she tugged at the collar of his jacket, pulling him down onto the soft, mossy ground. The faint glow of the vegetation surrounded them, illuminating her turquoise scales and shifting patterns. They shed each other's clothes tentatively, haltingly, uncertain where to touch or how to proceed with the differences in their bodies. But they navigated it with laughter and hushed murmurs. She traced her fingertips over his bare skin, enthralled by his warmth, while he marveled at the softness of her scaled plating, how it shifted subtly to reveal sensitive flesh beneath. The rain continued to fall, a gentle, glowing drizzle that made everything slick. When their bodies pressed together, each nerve ending felt alive and raw. They fumbled a bit, unsure of each other's rhythms, but the sincerity in every kiss and caress made up for any awkwardness. She made a low, melodic humming that resonated in Taryn's chest, and he realized it was some instinctive sound of pleasure or connection for her kind. It vibrated through his entire body, making him dizzy with desire. Every time he touched a new patch of her luminous skin, the color rippled in response, flashing brighter. The effect was mesmerizing, as if her body was singing with light. She clung to him, moaning softly whenever he pressed deeper kisses along her neck and collarbones. He in turn gasped when she explored him, trailing sensitive ridges along his thighs and stomach with her scaled fingertips. Time lost its meaning under that stormy sky. The pounding of the rain, the flicker of lightning far away, the glow of the moss beneath them, it all merged into a swirling backdrop for their union. Their cries mingled, and Terran felt tears prickle at the corners of his eyes, not out of pain, but from the surge of closeness he never thought he'd feel again. In those moments, the boundaries of species, language, and culture dissolved. It was just two souls clinging to each other, forging a bond that defied the chaos of the galaxy. When the storm finally eased and their breathing steadied, they lay entwined on that soft bed of moss, the skiff's dark shape looming in the background. Ashe nestled her head against Terran's chest, letting out a sated hum. She was trembling slightly, and he realized she might be cold. Gently, he pulled a part of his discarded jacket over her, even though it was soaked, just to shield her from the wind. She turned her face up to his, brushing her lips to his neck in a tender kiss. "Terran," she whispered, the translator absent but the meaning clear. He gathered her close, pressing a kiss to her damp hair. He didn't speak for a long while, simply letting the afterglow of their shared passion settle into him. He felt both invigorated and exhausted. Finally, he managed a shaky exhale. "That was—" He couldn't find the words. She let out a soft purr of agreement, nuzzling his cheek. Then she fumbled for the translator, clipping it back behind her ear. It sputtered to life, capturing her next phrase in a stilted monotone. "I have never been so free." Terran closed his eyes, hugging her tighter. "Me neither," he admitted. They lay there until the clouds above began to shift, and Terran realized they needed to get moving before some other threat found them. Reluctantly, they rose and dressed, helping each other with damp clothes. She kept her cloak draped loosely, though it was soaked, her tail flicking through the hem. He kept an arm around her waist, feeling protective now more than ever. They made their way back to the skiff, determination flaring in Terran's chest. This was no longer just about survival. He wanted a life beyond running. For both of them. Ashe seemed to sense his resolve, pressing close to him as they climbed the ramp. Inside, they spent the rest of the day repairing systems. The starboard hull was patched well enough to limp to another starport for more permanent fixes, but Terran had to be mindful of which starport they chose. The slavers might have networks everywhere. Ashe helped him realign the thrusters, and her mechanical aptitude impressed him. "Where did you learn this?" he asked as they bolted a panel back in place. The translator crackled. "My nest, we built, machines for deep-sea, oxygen harvest." "Not so different." Terran gave a low whistle. "You might be better at this than I am." She flashed him a teasing smile. "I learned from you." Their banter had become more natural now, laced with shared closeness and the memory of their intimate encounter outside. Occasionally, their hands brushed, and Ashe would steal a quick kiss. Each contact flooded Terran with warmth, reminding him that in a galaxy filled with brutality, they'd found something tender and fragile. Once the repairs were finished, Terran sat back on the floor of the skiff's cargo area, wiping sweat from his brow. Ashe settled beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. They looked out at the swirling green sky beyond the open hatch. "We'll need to find a place to hide for a while," Terran said quietly. She nodded, her frills twitching. "If you stay with me, I can endure anything." Her voice cracked, and Terran stroked her hair gently. He stood, offering her a hand. "Come on. Let's seal up the hatch and get going. We can't stay here forever. Maybe I know a place. An out-of-the-way settlement. We'll keep a low profile. See if we can pick up rumors about slavers and keep ahead of them." She clasped his hand, standing gracefully, the cloak draping around her luminous scales. "I follow you," she said simply. He gave her a long, searching look, remembering how battered and alone she'd been when he first found her. Something tightened in his chest at how far they'd come. "We'll get through this," he promised, and she nodded, believing him. They closed the hatch, sealed the bulkheads, and fired up the engine. Though the hull was barely holding together in places, the skiff managed to take off, rising from the glowing moss fields. Lightning flickered behind them as they ascended through the atmosphere and burst into the starry void. Terran's muscles ached, but he felt more alive than he had in years. Ashy settled into the co-pilot's seat, tucking the towel behind her so she could still smell it. She shot him a contented smile, and he felt an answering warmth spread through him. He keyed in the coordinates for a hidden route known to smugglers, hoping to avoid major traffic lanes. The starfield elongated as the skiff entered FTL once again, the swirling patterns reflecting on Ashy's face. She brushed her fingers over his hand on the throttle. "Thank you, my pilot," she murmured. Terran met her gaze, heart pounding. "I'd do it all again," he said softly, leaning in for one more stolen kiss before the jump fully enveloped them. They slipped into the corridor of shimmering light, and Terran closed his eyes, letting a quiet sense of hope fill his chest. In a universe of rusted stations, slaver ships, and endless dark, they'd forged a spark of something real. That spark might be all they needed to keep going. Together. They emerged from the jump into a region of space littered with drifting rock fragments, a leftover from some cosmic collision centuries ago. Terran carefully navigated around the debris, determined not to pick up any unwanted attention. As she scanned the readouts, her glowing eyes flicking over the consoles. Occasionally, she'd point out anomalies, a flicker of energy, or a drifting piece of wreckage that Terran might have missed. She was proving invaluable, and he couldn't help but smile. "You're good at this," he remarked. She shrugged, her scaled shoulders rippling. "It is easier with you." Drifting among the rocks, Terran recalibrated their course. They needed a relatively safe harbor. The place he had in mind was a small outpost on the edge of charted space, known as Seraph's Bend. It was run by a retired mercenary who owed Terran a favor, or so he hoped. He set the jump coordinates. Another push through FTL, and they'd be there, hopefully free of slaver entanglements, at least for a while. Ashy's tail coiled near his leg, a gesture of comfort, as if she sensed his tension. He glanced at her, his lips curving into a grateful smile. A few minutes into the jump, the system's alarm pinged. Terran frowned. "We're detecting a gravitational anomaly," he muttered, reading the screen. "Could be a micro-singularity crossing our path. Hang on." He slowed the ship, dropping them from FTL. The swirling corridor vanished, and they found themselves in empty space, empty except for the presence of some massive gravitational well off to the starboard side. Terran cursed. "We'll have to go around." He was about to punch in a new route when the comm crackled. An open broadcast, faint but distinct. "Mayday! Mayday, anyone out there? This is the merchant vessel Trellis. Engines down, life support failing, please." Terran bit his lip. Another sign of trouble. But ignoring it would weigh heavily on his conscience. He glanced at Ashy. She gazed back, her eyes solemn. "We help?" she asked quietly. Terran exhaled. "I can't just leave them." She gave a resolute nod, though a shadow of fear flickered across her scales. "Then we do it. But watch for traps." Terran adjusted the skiff's course, heading toward the coordinates the Mayday broadcasts provided. Soon, they found a battered merchant ship listing near the edge of the gravitational anomaly. Sparks flickered around its hull. Terran scanned for life signs, picking up a handful. "Seems real," he muttered. "No big sign of a trap, but we can't be sure." Ashy swallowed. "Caution." Terran nodded, bringing the skiff alongside, scanning for docking locks. He found a functional port near the midsection. Carefully, he matched rotation and latched on. "We can try to see if they need immediate rescue or if the ship can be saved," Terran said. Ashy stepped forward, taking his arm. "I go with you." He hesitated. "It might be dangerous. If there's a slaver plant." She shook her head firmly. "We face it, together." Terran's chest tightened with emotion. "All right. Let's gear up." They donned light respirators in case the merchant ship's air was compromised. Terran holstered a small blaster, while Ashy, uncertain with standard weapons, grabbed a short rod that could deliver an electric shock. They cycled through the airlock and stepped into the trellises corridor. The lights flickered, and the atmosphere was thin. Terran's handheld scanner beeped, indicating minimal oxygen. They hurried forward, guided by the faint life signs. A figure stumbled around a corner, a middle-aged woman in a merchant's jumpsuit, face pale, eyes wide. She nearly collapsed at Terran's feet. "Please help!" Terran crouched, helping her up. "We got your mayday. Where's the rest of your crew?" She coughed, pointing down the corridor. "Systems failing. They're in the cockpit. Hurry!" As she slipped the translator earpiece in so she could catch enough of what was said, though the woman was speaking a standard tongue. They rushed to the cockpit, finding 3 more people slumped at the controls. Terran checked for pulses, relieved to find they were alive, just suffocating from the failing air system. "We can get them to our skiff," he said. "But the trellis might be a lost cause." The merchant woman shook her head weakly. "No, we have cargo. Precious cargo. My father's life's work. If we lose it—" She trailed off, losing consciousness again. Terran grit his teeth, torn between saving them quickly and risking a search for cargo. Ashley met his gaze. "We do not have time for everything," she said softly. Terran nodded. "We'll load the survivors first, see if we have a minute for cargo." Carefully, they began ferrying the unconscious crew members back to the skiff. With Ashley's help, it went faster than Terran expected. She was strong for her lithe build, carrying one man over her shoulder, as if he weighed nothing. The translator dangled, occasionally spitting out her murmured reassurances to the unconscious man. Terran found himself in awe of her selflessness. She hardly knew these people but was determined to help. Finally, they placed the last of the crew in the skiff's cramped living area. Terran rigged an emergency oxygen feed. The merchant woman roused long enough to whisper, "Please, the cargo, star crystals, they're fragile." Terran swore under his breath, glancing at Ashley. He hated leaving valuable cargo to be swallowed by the anomaly, but the trellis was on the verge of catastrophic failure. He sighed. "Stay with them, keep them stable," he told Ashley. She nodded, though the translator scrambled the words. "Be safe, my Terran." He squeezed her hand, then darted back through the airlock into the trellis. He had only minutes, maybe less, before the hull gave out. Racing to the cargo hold, he found crates labeled "Star Crystals, handle with care." He recognized the name. They were used in advanced FTL relays, extremely valuable. He forced the hatch open, letting the cargo drift in the partial gravity. The entire hold was on the brink of decompression. Terran managed to grab 2 crates, hooking them onto a makeshift floating pallet. Then klaxons blared. "Hull breach imminent," he cursed, pulling the pallet behind him with a grunt. By the time he reached the airlock, the corridor was already venting air in violent gusts. He braced himself, sealed the pallet to a tether, and slammed the skiff's hatch. "We're clear!" he shouted. He barely had time to remove his respirator before the trellis's hull tore apart. The skiff automatically disengaged docking clamps, rocking as debris hammered the hull. The gravitational anomaly tugged at the remains of the merchant vessel, pulling it into oblivion. Terran rushed to the cockpit, where Ashley was already seated, pale but determined. "We must go!" she pleaded. He jammed the throttle, wrestling the skiff's controls. The swirling gravity well fought them, but eventually they broke free, jumping into the safety of open space. Terran slumped in his seat, breath ragged. "That was close." Ashley nodded, shaking with adrenaline. She reached over, taking his hand in hers, her grip firm. Behind them, the rescued crew stirred. Terran quickly explained the situation, giving them water from his limited stores. They were beyond grateful. The merchant woman, whose name was Sarat, thanked them profusely. When she saw the crates of star crystals, she nearly wept. "You saved them?" "Oh, we owe you everything." Terran shrugged. "Just pay it forward. Actually, if you can help us with repairs, that might be enough." Sarat nodded vigorously. "Of course. We'll do whatever we can." So Terran found himself with unexpected passengers, a pile of valuable cargo, and a ship that was already in rough shape. But at least the slavers were nowhere in sight. Perhaps the fiasco with the anomaly had shielded them from pursuit for the moment. They ended up drifting to a smaller hub station that Sarah knew about, a place that specialized in emergency repairs. Terran was initially suspicious. Any station could have spies. But Sarah assured them it was a hidden gem run by a half-crazed engineer who kept no official logs. Perfect for them. As they docked, Ashy stayed close to Terran, her eyes flicking warily at the new environment. The station was cramped but well-maintained. Robots bustled about, welding hull plates and patching leaks. Terran arranged for the repairs, paying partially with the star crystals as well as some of Sarah's other cargo. Despite her protests, Terran refused to let her cover everything. "We're in this together," he insisted. "Keep some for yourselves. Start over." Sarah tried to argue, but a single glare from Ashy, protective and resolute, made the merchant back down. The next few days were spent in the station's shadowed corridors. Terran and Ashy shared a small bunk in a storage room. The rescue had forged a bond between them and the merchant crew, though Terran was cautious about revealing Ashy's identity. She kept her cloak up, her translator earpiece hidden, only speaking quietly when necessary. Sarah, however, noticed enough to guess Ashy wasn't just some random traveling companion. One evening, she found Terran alone, fiddling with a broken console. Sarah cleared her throat. I don't mean to pry. But your companion, she's not exactly human, is she?" Terran stiffened. "I'd appreciate it if you kept that to yourself." Sarah nodded, raising her hands in peace. "Of course. She saved our lives, after all. I owe her. I want you to be careful. There are people who'd pay a fortune to exploit someone like her." Terran's jaw tightened. "I know." Sarah gave him a sympathetic look. "I see how you look at each other. Take care of her." Then she left him to his thoughts. That night, Terran found Ashy waiting in their bunk, the tattered towel in her arms. She gestured for him to lie down beside her. He climbed in, the cramped space forcing them to press close. She stroked his cheek. "You worry," she whispered through the translator. "Yes," he admitted. "Slavers, watchers, the unknown. And I worry I'm dragging you into more danger." She shook her head fiercely, fins trembling. "You gave me life. Hope. Danger is what we face together." He exhaled, leaning his forehead against hers. "I just wish we could find a place to live without constantly looking over our shoulders." She bit her lower lip, scales shifting color. "We will. We must." He held her through the station's artificial night cycle, lulled by the soft hiss of ventilation. He resolved that once the skiff was repaired, he'd set out with Ashy for a truly remote corner of space. They'd find somewhere to hide, or maybe even gather allies to fight back against the slavers. He didn't know yet. But with her warmth beside him, he felt that anything might be possible. Repairs concluded within the week, and Terran loaded up the skiff again, preparing to depart. Sarah and her crew, now recovered, planned to stay at the station for a while to arrange a new ship. Before Terran left, Sarah pressed a small data chip into his hand. "Coordinates," she said. "Uncharted region where my family used to mine star crystals in secret. It's remote, quiet, might be a good place for you two to rest. Or build something." Terran stared at the chip. "Why are you giving me this?" She smiled. "Because you didn't have to risk your life for us, but you did. Because your friend helped carry my crew on her back to safety. Because sometimes the galaxy needs a little kindness." Terran's throat constricted. "Thank you," he managed. Sarah nodded. "Go on, get out of here before I cry." Back on the skiff, Terran showed Ashy the coordinates. She tilted her head, studying them. "Far from routes?" she observed. "Yes. Might be what we need." She gave a careful smile. "Then we go." Terran took the pilot's seat, nodding. "Yes. Let's see if we can finally find some peace." They launched from the station, entering the swirl of stars once again. Terran input the new route, engaging the warp. As the corridor of light surrounded them, he reached for Ashley's hand. She intertwined her fingers with his, leaning close to brush a soft kiss on his shoulder. "Whatever waits," she whispered. "We face it together." Terran's gaze flicked to the battered towel she still kept near. He offered a half-grin. "You really love that thing, don't you?" She chuckled, the translator picking up her amusement. "It is you. It was first comfort I found." Terran's heart felt full, his chest tight with emotion. "Well, it's all yours," he murmured. "I've got the real thing, after all." She responded by pulling him into a slow, lingering kiss, the swirl of FTL light dancing across their joined silhouettes. They emerged from warp near the coordinates Sarat provided, finding a lonely star system with a single shining star and a handful of planetoids. Terran scanned for anything of note. One planet stood out, rocky, with wide desert plains, punctuated by canyons. The data chip indicated star crystal deposits scattered in the canyons. Perfect for stealth if needed. Terran guided the skiff into orbit, then took them down through a pale, cloudless sky. The canyon stretched below, bright red stone under a piercing sun. No signs of life on the scanner beyond small fauna. It was a silent, secluded world. Maybe it could be home. They landed in a sheltered canyon, tall walls on either side, a trickle of water meandering along the floor. Ashley stepped out, shading her eyes against the harsh sunlight. Her scales shimmered with an orange reflection. Terran joined her, scanning the surroundings. No structures, no people, just the wind whistling through the canyon. Ashley inhaled deeply, then turned to Terran, a hopeful glint in her eyes. "Peaceful," she said quietly. He nodded. "Yeah, it is." They spent the next few days exploring the canyon. The temperature soared under the midday sun, dropping sharply at night, but they managed. Terran rigged up a small shelter near the stream. He and Ashley tested the water for toxins, clean enough for drinking if filtered. They found crystals embedded in the canyon walls that glowed faintly at dusk, star crystals indeed, though smaller than the ones Terran had seen in cargo holds. Ashley wondered if they could be harvested to power some equipment. Terran was just relieved to see no immediate sign of slavers or unwanted visitors. Each evening, they curled together by a makeshift fire, cooking basic rations, sharing stories. With the translator on, Ashley revealed more of her culture, how her people lived in vast underwater cities, forging deep bonds through shared sense and resonance. She missed the ocean sometimes, but at least here, under the open sky, she felt safe. Terran told her about Earth, the cradle of humanity he'd only seen as a child in pictures. He confessed he'd always been an outcast, never quite belonging among other salvagers or colonists. "Maybe this is the first time I felt I had a home," he admitted, looking into the flickering flames. Ashley leaned against him, pressing her lips softly to his jaw. "Home is not place. It is who you share it with," she whispered. On the 5th day, they scouted further down the canyon, discovering a network of caves. Terran marveled at the intricate patterns of natural stone arches. Ashley stepped carefully over rocks, her frills fluttering in the breeze. The canyon's hush was absolute, broken only by their footsteps. Terran found a cave that opened onto a hidden lagoon, fed by an underground spring. The water was startlingly clear, shimmering with faint phosphorescent algae. Ashley let out a gasp of wonder. "Like my home's waters," she breathed, stepping forward. She tested the water, letting her foot sink in. A soft hiss of delight left her lips as she submerged her ankles. "So good." Terran smiled, stripping off his boots and rolling up his pants to join her in the shallows. The water was cool, a refreshing shock in the desert heat. Ashley waded deeper, letting out a purr-like sound that reverberated off the cave walls. She removed the translator earpiece, setting it aside so she could slip under the surface, swirling her tail around. The luminescent algae sparked around her scales, creating a ghostly outline of her form beneath the water. Terran watched, spellbound. Even in the gloom, her silhouette glowed with beauty. She beckoned him, and he followed, descending until the water reached his chest. When they emerged near each other, face to face, she pressed close, water droplets glistening on her scales. Her lips found his in a kiss that tasted of mineral spring and heartfelt longing. He slid his arms around her waist, feeling her tail curl around his leg. The translator was out, so their shared smiles and quiet moans went unmediated by machine. But in that moment, they didn't need words. The swirl of her luminescence and the brush of her lips conveyed everything. They drifted in the lagoon, letting the water support them, laughing breathlessly whenever the algae glowed extra bright at their movements. It felt like stepping into a dream. Time slipped away in that secret place. They lost themselves in gentle caresses, floating in the cool glow. Ashy's laughter was like a song, echoing through the damp air. For Terran, it was a revelation of intimacy, connecting not just physically but in a soul-deep bond. Memories of fear and danger receded. Here they were free. No threats loomed. No one to chase them or judge their interspecies closeness. He felt tears sting his eyes at the beauty of it all. Ashy noticed, cupping his cheek gently. Her eyes asked the question. He just smiled, pulling her into a tender embrace, resting his forehead against hers. Eventually they emerged, water streaming from their bodies. They gathered their clothes, quietly returning to the canyon camp as dusk approached. Under the vast starry sky, Terran lit a small fire, the flames dancing in the breeze. As she settled beside him, her head on his shoulder, the translator earpiece back in place. "This place, it could be home?" she ventured. Terran nodded, gazing at the silent canyon walls. "It could be," he said softly. "At least for a while. Maybe longer." She exhaled a trembling sigh of contentment. "We hide from the galaxy. But we are not alone." Terran pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "We have each other," he whispered. "And that's enough for me right now." As the fire crackled, they lay back, watching the sky. In the quiet darkness, Terran recalled the day he found her in that ruined station, clinging to his dirty towel. The memory felt distant, like a turning point in a life he no longer recognized. He turned his head to see Ashy, her eyes closed, a peaceful smile on her lips. The translator's faint glow indicated it was on standby. He reached over, lacing his fingers with hers. She squeezed softly in her half-sleep, a gentle reassurance that she was there, that they were safe. Maybe one day they'd face the slavers again, or the rest of the galaxy's dangers. But for now, beneath the alien stars, lying beside the woman who found comfort in his scent and taught him how to feel alive again, Terran felt truly at peace. The wind sighed through the canyon, carrying the promise of a new beginning. Together, they would face whatever tomorrow brought. Together, they had a chance at life.